Okay, we're back in the conference committee for H.454 on the afternoon of May 29th, and we're going to do a little bit of follow-up to what we started yesterday with the Secretary of State on the notion of drawing of awards. We have Ledge Council with us. I'm not sure who's coming up. Oh, I love you.
All right, well, good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel for the record, and
Tim Dublin, Legislative Counsel.
And we are happy to do our government operations show for all of you. We assume that you don't have that much time, so instead we're just going to pose the question, what would you like to know about awards, drawing the boundaries, the process, the timeline, and based on the information that you want, we will walk you through a summary of some of the issues.
I guess I would say we got a very good presentation from the Secretary of State yesterday, so probably we'll try not to be duplicative in what we ask. I would say that if we sort of have if the legislature can agree on district maps in January of next year, and could immediately start sort of an award drawing process, could you talk briefly about that process and what it takes from a legislative point?
Maybe I can add to that. Also, what steps could be undertaken or what parts of the work could be undertaken even before that happens?
Yeah, great question.
That would to preliminary to the time of the moment that the maps are adopted.
So we've talked about this in a few committees before, but establishing the actual district boundaries is the essential primary step.
Okay.
So moving into the actual apportionment of wards, very difficult to do without knowing what the district boundaries are. And why is that? Because as soon as you start shifting those district boundaries, you're changing the population of the district, and that has impacts on the ward boundary lines. So starting there, the essential step is, what are the districts? If you have the actual districts in place, then you can start the apportionment process in earnest. You may be able to get ahead of time some input on proposed district boundaries and what the wards would look like within them. But you would do that with the understanding that if there is any adjustment to the districts, you're going to have to completely undergo the apportionment process again.
I was thinking more about education and getting ready for the moment. What are the things you could do there?
And agreeing with Attorney Anderson, the only exception to that would be if apportionment weren't to be required in a situation where there was at large something like that seats to be determined. That's really the only exception where people would get ahead of that. But if that were not to be opted for, then really yes, districts would have to be very much in question for education.
The steps that you could take ahead of time, learning the mapping software is a crucial one, understanding the Secretary of State's process. I would say figuring out what the actual election dates will be, because that will impact the process that you're going to use. And in particularly, you probably heard this from the Secretary of State's office, but if you're going to use an election date that overlaps with other elections in the state, you're going to need the systems to be in conformity with what the Secretary of State uses, which is important. So understanding the mapping, understanding the process ahead of time are crucial steps. Yeah. And, in that vein, certainly working with the Secretary of State's office ahead of time is also going to be crucial to understanding what has to happen if the goal here is to start in January with an apportionment process that you might only have a few months to do, considering that unlike legislative apportionment, you may have two chambers working on the same proposals and passing them off to each other. Legislative apportionment, the House works on House proposals, the Senate works on the Senate proposals.
Oh, yes, of course.
And here you have both bodies working on the same district apportionment.
In our original proposal, sort of in the last days of passing H.454 in the House, we added the voting mortgage task force to sort of work alongside the district boundary group. So its powers and duties, and I'm sort of, the question really here is, can they actually really do much of anything without having a decision being made on the district lines? The task force shall, to the extent possible, start the process of recommending board boundaries. This recommendation shall also include optimal number of school board members per school board to maximize public representation, boundaries for school district voting boards within each school district, and with alternative options if necessary, including detailed maps clearly and ambiguously delineating ward boundaries that respect current municipal boundary lines when we just have the assistance of others. I'm just curious as to the extent that they could actually provide much of a head start if it's still up to the legislature to finalize those lines.
The last thing that you said is the most important part, and I don't want to give you an unhappy response here, but it's really up to you all as to whether the plan that you receive is going to be one that won't be adjusted.
Yeah.
Right? If there's a high degree of confidence that the district lines that you receive are going to pass, then yes, they could give you a great head start on the apportionment process within those district boundaries. But if the districts themselves are adjusted at some point, like I said, it's going to have downstream impacts on all of the wards apportioned within those districts. Could look at the LAD process as a parallel. And I know that we've talked about this in Senate Education before, but the LAB brings proposals for legislative reapportionment. And typically the legislature acknowledges that and uses parts of it, but disposes of many components of that. And if a similar process were to happen here, then the proposal you get for the apportionment of the districts could all be for naught.
Yeah.
And an example I could point you to is the town of Troy, which is consistently split. I don't think it was split in the last apportionment, but there's typically a lot of debate about the town of Troy, just as one small example of a shifting boundary line that comes up over and over again.
And I think, based on a lot of the testimony we received from you and the Secretary of State, that probably more so than education and tax implications is sort of what drove a lot of our timeline, just because of, you got to finalize one thing before you can move on to the next thing, which then requires a Herculean effort to then move on to the next step. All has to be done before a certain timeline for the Secretary of State's needs to have an election. That was a statement, not a question. I apologize. Thank you.
I have a big picture question. I have not received the benefit of all of your testimony to all the committees yet. Sorry. Regret that, because it's always a pleasure. The big picture constitutional issues that we're wrestling with, I would love just a tiny primer on them if that's possible.
Sure.
Tiny constitutional.
So when we talk about apportionment or redistricting or reapportionment, essentially it's reorganizing of groups of voters so that they will have the same power and representation with a set boundary district. That's what we're kind of talking about here. What comes up as far as basic legal principles, first and foremost, is the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. Really, it should sound somewhat familiar to folks, is one person, one vote. And for background, this is an antidote to the problem of vote dilution. Vote dilution is when different people have drastically different power and representation, depending on where they live, and drawing lines so that they are, the areas are drastically uneven population have the same voting power. Kind of two different sides of the same coin there. So one person, one vote, and the Equal Protection Clause applies to education in particular, I should note. This has been deemed a basic governmental function that triggers the need for equal protection representation of bodies that decide educational matters. This is from a case called Barnes v. Board of Directors in high school. It should be noted also that one person, one vote need not apply in all electoral constructions, as I mentioned before, at-large districts and appointments. Actually don't need those because really only where different populations will be voting to have different representatives in a shared governmental body. That's the primary issue there.
It's wherever you have a nexus between a voter pool and a representative on a body. That's where you run into the person, one vote requirement.
That's right. So you've,
Any construct that doesn't have that electoral nexus between a voter and an elected body.
So
don't have this requirement.
with appointing officials, no voters are required for appointment, so no need to bring in the equal protection clause there. For at large, everybody votes for everybody out there. So again, there's no districts that could be disproportionate to each other there. So those are the two readily available examples of when this concept wouldn't apply. I should say, though, that it does afford a lot of flexibility in the various possible electoral constructions that could be available to the legislature. Let's see, and that is exactly how do you structure these districts, under this principle. You could have single member districts. Sound familiar? That's why this body is organized. We get both single and multi-member. If they're adjacent or overlapping, various permutations. Also, I should note that this affords for numerous mechanics of voting systems. You could have plurality, majority voting, you could have ranked choice voting, proportional representation, et cetera. And also, I should note that this allows for constituent variations as well. We see on the local level here in this state that in some municipalities, even non-citizens can vote on local issues. So it's a broad umbrella constitutional issue, but affords much variance in practical matters on the ground.
And the practical considerations for apportionment and for the drawing of the boundaries, things to keep in mind. Tim covered mostly the proportionality between the districts, but you also have things like contiguous districting. So when you have islands that can impose a district, typically frowned upon. You also have the evaluation of whether you're connecting communities of interest. And that has largely to do with whether or not you are essentially gerrymandering a district in a way that is unpalatable under the US Constitution.
And
Do we have examples of what you're talking about, like voting districts that are islands and unto themselves? Or they're non-contiguous?
So we have examples on both sides, some state level decisions and some federal decisions. As far as, do you have an example of the islanding decisions?
In Vermont, I guess.
I have like a vague memory of reading about them in the news
Tim
during like the
has
last.
At least one case and a footnote that we can point out to you later. And as far as the, there's a decision from Vermont that is really interesting because it goes the other way, where they determined that there was not actually vote dilution, despite the fact that the voting district that was designed was a long, narrow, boot-shaped district. And the reason is that even though it may have been designed to protect incumbents and disadvantage certain voting blocks, the voters who would have been disadvantaged still got the attention of the winning candidate, which is a point of analysis we didn't cover. But as long as your vote gets the attention of the person who did in fact win, you are not disenfranchised.
right, and that's kind of Woodbury, I believe.
Yes.
And to kind of color that a little bit more, so essentially the required factors here, we start off with, do multiple districts that are electing people to the same deciding entity, board, or whatever that would be, do they have reasonably similar numbers in population? And then the courts look at, varying, they have different tolerances to various deviations that could be depending on the cost of running for. That is, how much deviation from that, truly equal number of populations is allowed and under what factors. We already talked about some of those factors. There's essentially, what is the governmental interest in providing, that deviation? Maybe compactness of district, contiguousness. There are permitted regard for existing political subdivision boundaries, natural or historic boundary lines, groupings of communities of common interest, as we already said. And then other factors can be considered, but may not be strong enough alone. For example, like history, economic commonality, things of that. And then to Tucker's point he just raised, lumping in small towns and large towns is permissible. Again, so long as smaller towns have the opportunity to influence the election or secure the attention of winning candidate. Also, it should be pointed out that non-racial political gerrymandering is permitted as well under current common law, federal law. So
Looping back to the earlier question, another thing that we'll do to prepare and do some education ahead of apportionment would be if you have a good idea of what the districts are going to be, start taking a look at some of the practical impacts on the ground. Where are the voting centers? Where's the town hall? How many voting locations do you actually have within the total district? And how might that be impacted by the ward boundaries and lines? Something that was discussed in the House, Representative Conlon brought up. I won't take credit for it, but I do think I introduced the notion of the mountain rule. Is there a mountain in the way of the voters and the place that they go to vote? It is something that has been historically considered in Vermont. There was, in fact, for the General Assembly, a mountain rule for many years.
Thank you. Questions outside?
I think that everything you said seems to apply to sort of a decision at a single district. And I'm trying to extrapolate that to a statewide system and the need for consistency within that statewide system. And that relationship to sort of one person, one vote. Right now, we don't have that.
So something, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, so
I
please
don't,
stop
I'm
me.
not sure. This is like, I'm very excited by this, but I don't want to go off topic either. So I'm,
I think the concept of uniformity between districts is actually, I don't know if that's a decision that you all have made yet. I apologize for not keeping up, but one thing that are you gonna have the same number of members on a district board, district to district? Important consideration for confronting some of the uniformity. Is the system district to district going to be the same? Or are you going to do what you've done with municipal corporations, which is allow for special acts governing an individual district? And the slang term that we use is a charter. Are you going to have individually chartered districts once you have the boundaries where you might set, for example, different governance models, district to district, or grant some sort of special authority? And in that case, all of the same principles apply for the apportionment, but you would have different considerations for the drawing of the ward boundaries if you had, for example, 9 district board members in one district and 3 in another.
so I don't want to mix up too many sort of constitutional rights in one conversation, but in the context of municipal charters and municipal towns or cities, that's what I mean by municipality, that kind of charter. I don't know if there's a constitutional right to any of the services that municipality provides. Whereas in the context of educational districts, there is a constitutional right that the state holds, not the educational municipality holds. And so in that context, is there more of a need to have that uniformity, given that there is a requirement at the state level to provide that equal?
It's a fascinating, novel legal question that has been bandied about since the time that this discussion started at the beginning of the session. I think in a few hearings that were held jointly between the Education and Government Operations.
I'm glad I got to jump into that just now.
At one point, and I am not certain that you will get a pinpoint legal analysis on whether, for example, the Brigham decision necessarily impacts the design of the districts.
Thank you.
thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you, the Education Committee folks, for allowing me to rehash old material with you.
Repeating helps us learn better.
We,
I don't know if we got this printed.
No, because I think, so.
that word.
So we can get this printed if we want, or. Yeah, she also had a word, she had a Word doc and I don't know where it is.
But we met last night.
I walked past even. Yes, it was very heartening to see you all sitting there.
He's waved as I
Yes.
left.
Just saying. So we, what we did is, I think, it was went through the, little section by section, we only did the first half, by the way.
Mhm.
Section 47, 46, 47, we left off. And we, recognizing that we're trying to work in the constricted timeline here. We just,
Love that.
that's the chase, but on a couple of levels. One is that, there's, the two bodies, and then there's within the two bodies, I think we're assuming, once we put this together, we made the assumption that this is gonna have to be a bipartisan, legislation, parties going for pass and other reasons, so we looked at it that way. And we also looked at it in terms of what the government looking for, the top priorities, and tried to put it together, thinking about House Senate position, and then also what it would take to, realistic level in the next couple of days to get to something that is where we need to go. So rather than just do the usual of just looking just between the two bodies, we kind of thought a little bit bigger.
Oh,
And taking an approach that we've got, if we're operating on that time frame, might as well cut to other issues. That's what we did, and we can just talk about it as we go.
I was actually looking through all of this, so
Senator Bongert said that they moved significantly outside of the boundaries of between our two negotiating
I
positions.
didn't use the word significant. But,
Okay.
But
Sorry, I got a significantly vibe. Excuse me for speaking for you. Thank you for correcting.
Column on the
yeah,
side
we're
by
just-
side.
we had that in mind as well. And just sort of trying to move.
I don't know if the governor has the right to move us beyond our two positions either, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, that's okay, but if we're gonna get this thing done, we're gonna have to just get realistic about it.
Send it out, get it vetoed,
Yeah, yeah.
come back in, but that's
So we were trying to avoid.
probably, yeah.
I guess as we go through this, if you would be so kind as to point out those areas where you are deviating from your own proposal.
And I would, offer Senator Cummings, I actually think it's possible to find agreement amongst ourselves and with the administration, even within the boundaries of our two proposals.
Well, hopefully that's what we,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
We're not deviating very much.
Okay.
so look at the first one. I mean, what more could you ask for?
What pages?
Find a seat in that position.
Okay, and what is C? I'm just curious about that.
We just need to, when we use the term supervisory districts.
Got it.
I use the term supervisory unions. So that we're clear for obvious reasons.
And that's is that a move outside of? Okay. And will you explain your thinking on that, Senator Bongert?
Well, again, thinking in terms of the whole picture here and getting, we've got, the rural school alliance, we've got superintendents, who supervisory unions, and just wanted to not be clear that we're not talking about, for instance, one of the maps that we've talked about has supervisory unions. So supervisory unions are part of this discussion, and so they need to be part of the discussion in the intent section. So it wasn't there per se, but it was actually in the bill.
Just process wise, I'm imagining that we could maybe talk through what you're suggesting, and then we could take a brief recess.
Yeah, we'll have some paperwork for you as well.
Yeah, we can break
I mean,
whenever, break whenever it makes sense to.
Let me find it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Section 2. What?
two, I believe, were fairly similar. I think just with the addition of that language in those, so.
Yeah, so to sort of cross-reference with our side by side, this is sort of page 4.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, okay. So, and, so the first one that, you know, is lots of little discussion here with you is the school district, redistricting task force. And we, again, using all of those factors that we were thinking about as we did this, we suggested the Senate position, but with basically let's just get to it, is 6 legislators, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, not from the same party. And then 1 each from the VSBA, the VSA, and the VPA. So a total of 9. And majority legislators, but with those 3 will be represented.
Okay, your original proposal did not have the BPA.
No, it's different. As we just kind of went for what we thought might be a practical.
And you're increasing from 2 legislators to 6.
Did you have fewer
Well,
legislators?
actually, we never really quite figured out how many you had. We had, you had 4, right?
We had 4, yeah.
You had,
2.
and you had 2.
Yeah.
I think you had 4.
No.
Yeah.
No,
So
2. You're right, 2. I'm sorry.
by the time, anyway, we had also wanted to come up with the number 9.
Okay.
Yeah. But.
Why?
Well, just Theo told us tends to be better to have an odd number.
Okay, and you want 9 and not 7.
I didn't.
Okay.
Okay. You're at 11
Yeah.
before. Now you're
7 to 9 is usually considered functional.
And you moved from 2 public hearings to 3. Page 9 side.
Oh, just adding the pros and cons of each proposal, I think. Is that what it was?
You already have that. So
I
think it's the assistance language there, which is different than your assistant.
The facilitator? Or no?
And I'm looking side by side, page 9.
Page 9, thank you.
page 9, little letter D.
Little letter D, assist, yeah.
I don't see a little letter D.
don't see it either. That's what I'm looking for.
I also have no,
Oh, I'm sorry. It's on page 8.
Oh,
Okay, different.
providing contracted resources, great.
okay, you're on the triple. Okay.
I'm on the triple, sorry.
Okay.
Which side?
Where everyone else is on the double, can you move to
Sorry,
that
I'm
side?
on the side by side, but, well, I like this one because it has the.
No, but no one else is using
the
it.
Governor's position in there, if you don't have it. you just-
I don't want to transfer all my notes.
So,
So D is the assistant.
Yep. Okay.
She'll have the assistant. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so, okay. And 2A,
Well, House 4.
oh, okay,
You're going with our House
the 4,000
report.
reports in that page 8 of side by side. That's the,
Okay, so yours may very well be, when this says 8, that's probably on the 3 column side by side as the 2 column side by side.
well,
We have, it's E, reports and maps, is that what you mean? Over here?
Yes. Oh, got it. Starts on
Okay.
there.
Okay.
okay, yeah, we took your,
We took yours,
your house.
Mhm.
Okay.
Why JFO call the first meeting?
Just, I think we had that at one point in the House version, I mean, in the Senate version. So we had to have something to call it. I think that's what happened with our, income study and everything. I think JFO called the first meeting. Because you haven't elected a chair.
Yeah.
I think Catherine may have called the first meeting. Julie called the first meeting.
Julie Durant was called first. JFO did call the first meeting to order. It was also an all legislative task force that JFO was staffing.
Which is not the case.
Yeah.
It's not all legislative.
I'm not saying whether or not legislative staff
Yeah.
should or would staff the committee, but rather these are different constructs.
Okay.
So it's a decision.
Okay,
That is not something.
we will, yep. Can't imagine that's gonna be the last thing we're disagreeing on at the end of the day. Okay.
Um, So then,
I mean, you want to take out the maximum of 8,000, but your version doesn't have a minimum in there, correct? So
no,
there'd be no,
no maximum, no minimum.
but our minimum would be in there,
Yes.
If your minimum was flexible,
right?
had that flexibility in it.
Include the house position minimum.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
In your CT program.
Okay.
Right here. Where did that go? First.
Okay.
2A is that voting or task force that I actually asked about during this discussion.
So we realized that, we had been thinking one way and we had been all the way with House Ed Committee, Senate Ed Committee. But I think we just realized that it's going to work. So.
All right, and looks like you're agreeing with dealing with boards and election boards and all that as chapter 2 next year.
Yeah. And we didn't quite know, we thought retaining somehow the 250 was a good idea. I wasn't quite sure how to do it,
I think it would sort of remain available. We can get some clarification.
For that purpose when the time comes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So retain for that purpose when the time comes.
Where were you saying?
Just voting district task force would
Yep.
stay.
Okay.
They agree with saying that the transitional boards stuff is a job for next year.
Great.
But it does come with a $250,000 appropriation. And so the question is what to do about that.
I'm sure we can figure that out.
Well, I think you just kind of,
At least leave it there for that purpose, but
Yep.
they're available in another year. Section. Did I miss? Section 3.
that's just. Right.
All right, section 5, I think we call it section 4. These are numbered a little, I think somewhat perhaps incorrectly. But this is the class size minimums and what to do about class size minimums language, I assume.
Yeah.
And you're saying,
Senate language.
So.
All right. 6.
Section
Seven.
which is, when we say section 6, we are talking.
State Board of Education
Which I'm
rules?
referring to, well, we have
Oh,
different
no.
section numbers. So I think we're referring to the
Failure to comply.
It's-
So you mean, well, there were no changes between the two?
Correct.
That's right. Yeah.
Section 7.
Okay.
There's school size.
It's just the rules reporting related to school side.
Okay, we only had intent language, which you had originally said you had pulled, but now you're putting back in a more general description then. In other words, ours had numbers as an intent for the future.
Yeah.
Okay, but you are adding a very significant piece of language here in section B. Could you talk a little bit about that?
You don't matter school size.
Under school size, it is further the intent of the General Assembly that in the event of that the local effort opposes the closing of a public school by a school district, a professional judgment panel will determine whether the school is viable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not in any of the proposals anywhere.
I know.
Neither the governor's nor yours nor ours.
I mean, we're taking in everything, which is two caucuses that didn't vote for this bill, as it came through either the Senate or the House. And a lot of other things that have happened, organizations. Yeah,
I
think, go ahead.
And I know Representative Conlon flagged this, and I know that we all want to find something that passes. I also want to be really careful that we are not violating either of our body's rules on the floor in order to make sure that we have something that passes our floor. So I just want to sort of really like put extra flag on things and be very careful about when we're doing that and when we're not.
This was really in part a practical way to bridge for some communities, the fear gap.
Yeah, I understand the intent.
Was a way
Yep.
to a practical approach to sort of getting.
It's, as we deviate further and further outside of what both of our bodies agreed to, I think it makes it nervous.
It makes us more vulnerable to other things. Is niche a technical term? I don't mean that as a dig. I'm really genuinely.
This is also not intended to be.
It was late.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. I just, okay. I will take it on vibe.
Yeah, take it on.
Okay, as it is intended. Thank
We
you.
haven't given this to the drafter.
Clearly, yes. Thank you. Okay.
They will clean it up if we agree to.
And I don't know, if you. So it just makes, so I can give, I'll give you an example of what we were thinking.
Mhm.
If you would like to see.
Sure.
In the district where I am, the southern half of the county will end up with, at this point, 2 public high schools. One of them, the big one, Mount Anthony. And one of them, the smaller one of Arlington.
Mhm.
And what we have now is on some instances, kids coming from Bennington to go to the smaller school environment because that's where they're going to thrive. And conversely, kids go the other direction because that's, and so we just wanted to make sure that we're recognizing the fact that there will be a place for niche schools or schools that cater to the needs of different kids. They wouldn't necessarily be all-purpose high schools, but just the notion that we want to just flag that is something that might be a need within some districts. And that's what it's just intended language.
I have districts that have a separate school building more than a few miles from the main campus for their kids who, need outside the normal, I'm forgetting the niche term. But the alternatives education programs. So is that part of the high school? Is that it's a separate school?
Is it?
I mean, I think there's a question about, are we maintaining all of these buildings everywhere? Isn't that part of what we're not doing?
The answer to that is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I know the BOCES model, which the Agency of Education has not done much with yet, but it's statute. In other states, the BOCES model is designed to do exactly what you described within an existing district, right?
And I guess I would refer to what you're referring to as a program, not a school.
Yes.
Because it's operated as a program, while it may be in a separate piece of real estate.
So, what we said here was regional high schools, but recognizing that there might be a place for niche schools that support what works within that district.
All right, we can pass over school construction because our task forces have done such good work there. Okay, prohibition on that. This is the language that's in yellow on page 17, I imagine. So
Is this in some way I had a concern about no reasonably accessible public school and what that actually meant in the term reasonably, is that what are you addressing that in some way here or?
I think it's rather than the yellow that you see on the side by side, it's replacing after the word geographically.
Okay.
With a different clause that I think was
Okay, thank you.
trying to give it effect.
Submission to approved rules, that's page 19. Then, this house on section 19. Petition transition. Okay. Statewide intents and the house. There wasn't a disagreement there.
Wait, I'm really confused. Section 19, there was no disagreement, so what are you agreeing with?
Re-emphasizing that they agreed.
We could have just put no, we could have put.
Okay, sorry. I just didn't know if I was in the right section. Okay,
20, again, there was no disagreement anyway.
So, no disagreement.
21. You're proposing graduation and calendar or something that takes place post consolidation.
is it a report after consolidation or it happens after consolidation?
Well, I think consolidation occurs will probably inform whatever is agreed to.
Sure.
So, I don't know, maybe we're talking about semantics. I don't,
No, I don't think we are.
I mean, I would assume that after consolidation occurs, that, the leaders of those governance units and others would get together and to, or not to.
So you don't want, you're taking this out of the AOE to do.
I'm not even saying who, I'm just saying that I think should happen after consolidation. The answer to your question is yes, report.
Okay,
Report after consolidation, figure out.
someone
By
will,
who?
We don't. AOE, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Two. Just the same as the two in any event.
Right, yeah, that's already agreed to.
Not a lot goes on for a while because everything is.
Two. And 37.
We really meant Senate version here, we didn't write that, I think.
your budget section, is that what you're talking about? The appropriation?
No,
As far as school.
that just says Senate version.
Okay,
Appropriation.
Before we get to that, so the appropriation,
Yeah.
the Senate version, is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay. And then section 37, it's your language, but changing it to municipality. Okay, so, and I think we might not be able to use municipality because that would include like garbage districts
Right, I
and
was wondering
stuff.
about that,
Oh,
yeah.
And so it might need to be like town, village, city or something like that, but
Something other.
yes.
Right, placeholder.
Tucker and Beth are talking.
talking.
Okay,
Massage.
yes, okay.
One of the 252.
38.2.
Section 48.
And just jump to 46. These were all already printed.
How do I have all this yellow?
Because now we go to, that's
We do it 45.
Yeah, you have all this. Why did you skip all that?
We decided we weren't ready to. We just.
Okay, we're just not talking about that yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right, and
Okay.
we didn't go that, we didn't, yeah.
right. Yeah.
Okay. And then 48.
So let me just, 46, so that, in this. The statewide adjustment is. Removed, repealed in FY 20, I think it's July 1st, 29. And then there's numerous areas in the bill where it's. In the language on both sides where. We need to keep that.
The CLA?
No, the statewide adjustment.
We did last year.
Yeah, what was done last.
Yeah, so that is not, it's not intended to be repealed. It's that there was a technical problem with how we passed it last year.
Okay, I guess I probably need to have some further.
Yeah,
conversation
happy,
with John.
please have that further conversation.
I'm
It's-
heartened to
yes.
hear that's not what we're.
Yeah, no, that is not, and I said that in the hallway, but we haven't talked
Yeah,
about
I
it.
know. Yeah.
And I think Julia could probably explain it too. It was or Jake could have when he was here. It's, we basically just put it in statute incorrectly and they've been implementing it correctly, but we need to correct it in statute.
Okay, so that's all it is, and that's.
Yeah.
And then on 48, that's just a question I had, and I wasn't clear, really, I think in either versions. I think the language clearly says in here that.
Wait, I need to catch up with where
Oh, yeah, I'm
where
sorry.
you are. You said section 48?
Yeah,
Wait, I'm still not there.
Okay.
Wait, okay.
And we hadn't really gotten into this in great depth anyway.
Yeah. So my question is, I think I see in the language where if for some reason the legislature could not agree on a supplemental yield, for whatever reason, if you use the one from the previous year. But I don't see anything that says, if we get to the end and, Armageddon, we're approaching July 1st, we can't agree on a homestead rate or a homestead or.
Oh, a default rate like we have.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm missing that, but I think
I'm not sure either, but
that's something we need to think about.
Yep. I genuinely don't remember. It's possible there's one somewhere in here.
It could be there's some other language in here that's not on these pages.
Yeah, let's ask John that.
Remember having the discussion.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have John in quickly at some point later this afternoon to just cover 46 and 48.
Sure.
Okay. Not all of section 48, but just that question that Scott has.
But we got dispensation. Okay, great.
Okay. And we just have to go if there's a roll call, as I assume you do too.
We might not even. Yeah.
All right, well,
Okay.
why don't we take 15?
Does that work?
Maybe Andy can wind John for some time, just whenever we can get him.
For John.
Yeah,
Just get time.
Oh,
Yeah, and really just for those two quick technical questions, I don't want to